66 million years ago, a rock fell out of the sky and ended a world. 10 kilometers of stone and metal, moving faster than sound, struck the shallow waters off the Yucatán Peninsula with the force of billions of nuclear weapons detonating at once. Within hours, wildfires raced across entire continents. Within months, a curtain of dust and sulfur blotted out the sun. Within years, the food chains that had sustained the largest land animals in the history of the Earth collapsed from the bottom up. When the skies finally cleared, the non-avian dinosaurs were gone. Every Tyrannosaurus, every Triceratops, every last armored, horned, feathered giant that had ruled the land for more than 150 million years had vanished. But here is the detail almost nobody sits with. That impact did not have to happen. Move the asteroid's trajectory by a fraction of a degree, delay it by 30 seconds, and it lands in deep ocean instead of shallow, sulfur-rich rock, releasing a fraction of the debris. Either change, and the mass extinction that defines the boundary between two eras of life on Earth may never occur at all. So ask the question properly, the way a scientist would, not the way a movie poster does. If the dinosaurs had not been extinguished that day, would they still be recognizable today? And if they were not, would there have been room left in the world for a species like us to exist at all? That is the investigation this film sets out to run. Not a fantasy of dinosaurs frozen in time, wandering through modern cities as living fossils, but something far stranger and far more scientifically honest. A reconstruction of 66 million years of evolution that never happened, built from what we actually know about climate, continents, competition, and survival. Before we go further, if the idea of tracing an alternate history of life on Earth through real fossil evidence is the kind of thing that keeps you thinking long after the video ends, this is exactly the kind of channel worth subscribing to, because there is a lot more of this ahead. Start at the instant the split occurs. In the official history, the asteroid strikes at an almost uniquely destructive angle into a seabed rich in sulfur-bearing rock at a location and moment in Earth's history when the compounding damage is close to the worst possible outcome available. Researchers have pointed out that had the impact occurred in a deep ocean basin instead of the shallow Chicxulub platform, far less vaporized sulfate would have entered the atmosphere, and the resulting cooling and darkness may never have reached extinction-level severity. In our alternate timeline, the asteroid still exists, still crosses Earth's orbit, but the encounter is different. Perhaps it passes near enough to alter Earth's climate for a season and nothing more. Perhaps it strikes, but in deep water, and the wildfires are regional instead of global. The dust cloud thinner, the sunlight dimmed for months rather than years. There is no impact winter on the scale the fossil record shows us. The base of the food chain, plankton in the oceans, photosynthesizing plants on land, does not collapse the way it did in reality. And so, the animals standing at the end of the Cretaceous keep standing. But before imagining what comes after, we have to be honest about what was actually there before the sky changed. This matters because popular imagination tends to blur 150 million years of dinosaur history into a single frozen snapshot, as if Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus rex shared a forest, when in truth they are separated by more time than separates Tyrannosaurus from us. The animals alive in the final years of the Cretaceous, in places like present-day Montana and the Hell Creek Formation, were a specific, geologically brief cast of characters. Tyrannosaurus rex, a bipedal predator that could reach roughly 12 to 13 meters in length and weigh 8 or 9 tons. Triceratops, a heavily built herbivore whose skull alone could stretch beyond 2 meters, carrying a bony frill and paired brow horns, evolved most likely for combat with rivals and defense against predators. Edmontosaurus, a duck-billed herbivore moving in herds, grinding tough vegetation with hundreds of continuously replaced teeth. Around and above them, the skies and undergrowth were already full of feathered dinosaurs in the strict sense, along with true birds, the lineage that would ultimately be the only dinosaurian line to cross the boundary at all. This is the ecosystem the fossil record actually preserves for the last few 100,000 years before impact. And it is this ecosystem, not some composite Jurassic Park mixture of eras, that has to be the true starting point for anything that follows. Here scientists disagree, and the disagreement itself belongs in the story rather than being smoothed away. Some paleontological analyses of the fossil record from western North America suggest dinosaur diversity may have already been declining in the final few million years before the asteroid struck, possibly due to cooling climates and shrinking habitat as inland seas retreated. Other research, using ecological niche modeling across a broader data set, has argued that there is no strong signal of a long-term, climate-driven decline, and that dinosaurs may have remained ecologically robust right up until the impact. Neither side claims certainty. What both agree on is this: the fossil record for the very last dinosaurs is geographically patchy, concentrated heavily in a handful of well-studied regions, which makes any confident verdict about global health difficult to reach. For the purposes of this film, we will hold both possibilities open, because an honest counterfactual has to begin from an honest present, not from a myth of eternal dominance interrupted only by bad luck. So the asteroid does not finish the story. Dinosaurs, whatever their exact condition in that final Cretaceous moment, survive into the next chapter. And that is precisely where the popular fantasy runs out of road, because surviving a single crisis is not the same as remaining unchanged for 66 million years afterward. Consider what Earth actually did across that span of time. In the real history we can measure, roughly 56 million years ago, a sudden spike in global temperatures, known to researchers as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, pushed average temperatures several degrees higher within a geologically short window, reshaping which plants and animals could survive where. Around 34 million years ago, in the opposite direction, ice sheets began forming on Antarctica for the first time in tens of millions of years, as ocean currents reorganized and carbon dioxide levels fell. Grasslands, essentially absent from the world of the late Cretaceous, expanded dramatically, starting around 20 to 30 million years ago, turning closed forests into open plains across huge stretches of every continent. The Himalayas rose. The Isthmus of Panama eventually closed, joining 2 continents and rerouting ocean currents around the entire planet. And then, beginning around 2.5 million years ago, the planet entered a long, repeating rhythm of ice ages, glaciers advancing and retreating dozens of times, each cycle reshaping coastlines, forests, and migration routes. None of that history disappears simply because an asteroid missed its mark. Every one of those transformations would still occur because they are driven by plate tectonics, ocean chemistry, and orbital mechanics, forces that operate on schedules the extinction of a single group of animals cannot touch, which means that any dinosaur lineage carried into our hypothetical present would have had to survive not one catastrophe, but an unbroken relay of them. A sudden thermal spike, a slow global cooling, the birth of grasslands, the rise of mountain ranges, and repeated ice ages, each one closing old opportunities and opening new ones. A Triceratops-shaped animal, built for the humid, subtropical floodplains of the Cretaceous, gains nothing from surviving the asteroid if the swamps it depends on dry into grassland 20 million years later. Either its descendants changed dramatically, shifting body plan, diet, and physiology to match a colder, drier, more open world, or they vanish anyway, quietly, the way most lineages in Earth's history eventually do, asteroid or no asteroid. This is the discipline the rest of this film holds itself to. We are not asking what a frozen, unchanged Tyrannosaurus would look like wandering a modern highway, because that animal, built for a Cretaceous climate that no longer exists, would almost certainly not have survived to see one. We are asking what descendants, reshaped again and again by 66 million years of changing continents and climates, might plausibly look like if that lineage kept threading the needle of each successive crisis. That is a harder, stranger, and far more scientifically interesting question, and it is the only one worth answering honestly. To answer it, we need the one piece of hard evidence that is not speculation at all: the birds. Every sparrow on a windowsill, every eagle riding a thermal, every ostrich striding across open savanna is taxonomically a dinosaur. Birds descend directly from small, feathered theropod dinosaurs, and their survival through the exact same asteroid impact that killed every other dinosaur lineage is one of the best documented transitions in paleontology. Multiple lines of fossil and genetic evidence indicate that the bird lineages which made it through the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary were disproportionately small-bodied, ground-dwelling, or generalist feeders capable of surviving on seeds and detritus during the years when sunlight was scarce and larger plants and animals were dying en masse. That detail is not incidental. It is the blueprint. It tells us precisely what kind of dinosaur was built to survive catastrophe: small, adaptable, and undemanding, rather than large, specialized, and locked into a narrow ecological role. And once that bottleneck passed, birds did something extraordinary. In the tens of millions of years that followed, they diversified explosively, radiating into more than 10,000 living species today, ranging from 3-gram hummingbirds to 2.5-meter ostriches, filling niches as varied as deep-diving penguins, nocturnal flightless kiwis, and apex aerial predators like eagles and falcons. If one narrow, surviving branch of dinosaurs could do that after the world's worst-case scenario, the ceiling for what non-avian dinosaurs might have achieved without that catastrophe is, at minimum, comparably high. But birds were not competing alone in this hypothetical world, and neither would their larger non-avian relatives have been. Mammals were already present throughout the Cretaceous, and this is a point worth stating plainly, because it corrects one of the most persistent myths in popular science. Mammals were not tiny, incompetent creatures waiting meekly in the shadows for dinosaurs to disappear so they could finally succeed. The Mesozoic fossil record includes mammals that were already burrowing, swimming, gliding, and in a few remarkable cases, such as the badger-sized Repenomamus, apparently preying on small dinosaurs outright. Diversity among mammals at the end of the Cretaceous was real, if modest compared to what followed, spanning multiple major lineages, including the ancestors of today's marsupials and placental mammals. What research increasingly suggests is not that mammals were incapable of larger body sizes or new ecological roles, but that the space for those roles, in a world still ruled by dinosaurs, from the size of a chicken to the size of a school bus, was already claimed. One influential line of research, examining the pace of mammalian diversification, found that the explosive rise of large-bodied, ecologically varied placental mammals we associate with the age after dinosaurs did not begin immediately after the extinction, but accelerated notably in the following 10 to 15 million years, once the ecological chaos of recovery had settled. That timing detail matters enormously for our counterfactual, because it suggests the opportunity mammals eventually seized was not simply their destiny arriving on schedule. It was a door forced open by catastrophe, a door that, in our alternate history, never gets forced open at all. So picture the standoff. In a world where the asteroid does not clear the board, dinosaurs, non-avian and avian alike, continue to occupy the large-bodied herbivore niches, the apex predator niches, the mid-sized scavenger and omnivore niches that they had already spent well over 100 million years optimizing. Mammals continue evolving too, driven by their own pressures, but largely within the constrained roles available to them. Small, nocturnal, insectivorous, or omnivorous, quick and adaptable, much as they had been for the majority of the Mesozoic. This is not because mammals are somehow evolutionarily inferior. Their biology, warm-bloodedness, live birth in most lineages, complex parental care, and flexible dentition gave them real advantages, particularly in colder, darker, or more unpredictable environments. It is because ecological space, not raw biological potential, is often the deciding factor in which groups expand and which remain constrained. And in this alternate timeline, the space at the top simply never opens the way it did in reality. If you are enjoying this kind of deep dive into the mechanics behind evolutionary history, a quick like on this video genuinely helps more people find it, and there is a great deal more of the story still ahead. So, let the clock run. 66 million years is an almost incomprehensible span, more time than separates us from Tyrannosaurus rex itself, and across that span, nothing in nature stays the same for long. We can't hand you a field guide to specific species that never existed, because doing so would cross the line from science into fiction. What we can do responsibly is describe the kinds of forms that ecological pressure, applied consistently over tens of millions of years, tends to produce and match those functional shapes to the pressures this alternate Earth would actually apply. Begin with the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, roughly 56 million years ago. In the real timeline, this sudden warming spike favored smaller mammalian body sizes, a well-documented pattern researchers call the dwarfing effect, because heat stress punishes large-bodied animals disproportionately. In our alternate timeline, that same thermal pressure would act on large-bodied dinosaurs too. Any lineage of giant herbivores clinging to a Cretaceous-style body plan optimized for a cooler, more stable climate would face a brutal filter, shrink, migrate toward cooler latitudes, or vanish. The dinosaurs most likely to make it through this bottleneck would be exactly the kinds of animals the bird lineage had already proven successful. Smaller, more heat-tolerant, more flexible in diet. Move forward to the slow global cooling beginning around 34 million years ago, and the spread of open grassland habitats from roughly 20 million years ago onward. This is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because grasses represent a wholly new kind of food, tough, silica-rich, low in nutrition per bite, requiring specialized grinding teeth and, in many mammal lineages, complex multi-chambered digestive systems to extract enough energy. In the real world, this transition is closely tied to the rise of the great grazing mammals we know today: horses, bovids, and their relatives, animals with high-crowned teeth built to withstand the abrasive diet grass demands. In an alternate world, where dinosaurs still occupy the large herbivore niche, some ornithischian dinosaur lineages, animals like the duck-billed hadrosaurs and their descendants, already possess dental batteries. Rows of hundreds of interlocking, continuously replaced teeth that were arguably even better suited to grinding tough, abrasive vegetation than the teeth of most contemporary mammals. It is entirely plausible within the bounds of known anatomy rather than invention that some dinosaur lineage could have evolved into the dominant grazer of an alternate Miocene grassland, filling a role remarkably similar to a wildebeest or a bison, but wearing feathers instead of fur. Predators would have to answer that shift in turn. Open grassland changes the rules of hunting entirely, rewarding speed, stamina, and pack coordination over the ambush tactics that dense Cretaceous forests once favored. Several late Cretaceous predatory dinosaurs, including smaller, more agile relatives of the great Tyrannosaurs, already showed signs of long cursorial limbs built for sustained pursuit. A lineage descended from such animals, continuing to specialize for speed and endurance across an open, grass-dominated world, would not need to reinvent itself from nothing. It would simply be extending a trajectory the fossil record already shows dinosaurs were capable of pursuing. There is another force we have not yet accounted for, one that has nothing to do with temperature or vegetation and everything to do with geography. Throughout this entire 66 million year span, the continents themselves kept moving. India, an island continent for tens of millions of years, drifted north and eventually collided with Asia, throwing up the Himalayas. Australia and South America drifted apart from Antarctica, opening the Southern Ocean and setting the stage for that continent's permanent ice sheet. And in the real fossil record, we already have direct evidence of what isolation does to large animals over deep time. On what is now Hatzeg Island, in present-day Romania, a chain of Cretaceous islands isolated a population of sauropod dinosaurs from mainland populations, and over generations, natural selection on an island with limited resources favored smaller body size, producing dwarf sauropods barely a sixth the length of their mainland relatives, a pattern paleontologists call island dwarfism, well documented across countless other lineages from elephants to deer. Apply that same logic to our alternate Earth, and continental drift becomes a kind of natural laboratory, isolating dinosaur populations on newly separated landmasses, on island chains, on continents like Australia or Madagascar cut off from the rest of the world for tens of millions of years, and allowing each isolated population to evolve along its own distinct trajectory. Some growing larger in the absence of predators, others shrinking dramatically to survive on limited resources. The dinosaurs of an alternate modern Africa, in other words, might look nothing like the dinosaurs of an alternate modern Australia, not because either possibility is invented freely, but because plate tectonics itself guarantees divergence once populations are physically separated for long enough. Then come the ice ages, beginning in earnest around 2.5 million years ago, an unforgiving, repeating rhythm of advancing glaciers and retreating warmth that has shaped, tested, and eliminated countless lineages of mammals, our own included. Cold-adapted dinosaurs are not pure invention either. Fossil evidence from high-latitude sites in places like Alaska and Australia demonstrates that some dinosaur species already lived through long, dark polar winters during the Cretaceous, and there is ongoing research into signs consistent with insulating feather coverings across a range of species, though scientists are still working to determine how widespread true insulating plumage actually was among non-avian dinosaurs. A lineage that had already adapted to cold, low-light conditions in the Cretaceous would have a genuine head start entering an Ice Age world in exactly the way that certain mammal lineages ancestral to today's Arctic foxes and muskoxen use their own pre-adaptations to cold to survive the same glacial cycles in reality. Notice what all of this adds up to, and notice what it deliberately refuses to do. It is not a list of imaginary species presented as fact. It is a chain of real, documented anatomical and ecological capabilities, dental batteries, cursorial limbs, evidence of polar adaptation, insulating body coverings, run forward through real climate history using the same logic paleontologists use to explain the mammals that actually did rise to dominance in our own timeline. Some dinosaur lineages under this logic would almost certainly go extinct along the way, unable to keep pace with one crisis or another, exactly as countless mammal lineages did in reality. Others would diversify, specialize, and persist, their body plans reshaped almost beyond recognition from their Cretaceous ancestors, the way a modern whale's flippers descend from the legs of a land-dwelling ancestor, or the way a hummingbird's needle-thin beak descends from the jaws of a theropod dinosaur. The point is never that dinosaurs would freeze in place. The point is that dinosaurs, like every other lineage that has ever persisted on this planet, would have had to become almost unrecognizable in order to survive at all. And this brings us, finally, to the question the entire investigation has been circling from the very first sentence. In this alternate Earth, where dinosaurs never lost their grip on the large-bodied niches and mammals continued evolving within a narrower, more constrained ecological space, would there still be room for something like us? To answer that, we have to trace the specific fragile chain of events that produced primates and then hominins and then us in the real world, and ask honestly whether that chain depended on the extinction event at all. The earliest primates appear in the fossil record not long after the mass extinction, small, tree-dwelling, large-eyed mammals exploiting the newly available forest canopy niches, a habitat that, in the Cretaceous, had been heavily contested by small dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and other arboreal or semi-arboreal reptiles. Later, roughly 7 to 6 million years ago, the ancestors of modern humans and chimpanzees diverged, and the human lineage began the long walk toward bipedalism on the savannas of eastern and southern Africa, savannas that themselves only existed because grasslands had already spread across the continent, following tens of millions of years of global cooling and drying. From there, brain size expanded dramatically over roughly the last 2 million years, a change closely associated in the fossil and archaeological record with the controlled use of fire, increasingly sophisticated stone tool technology, and cooperative social behavior, culminating ultimately in a species capable of building the very screen you are watching this on. Every one of those steps depended on ecological space that, in our alternate timeline, may simply not have existed in the same form. If the forest canopy niche remained contested by agile, tree-capable small dinosaurs, rather than opening cleanly for early primates. If large-bodied dinosaurian grazers and predators continued to dominate the African savanna landscape that early hominins depended on for open, walkable terrain and huntable prey, if the specific 10 to 15 million year window of relatively low ecological competition that allowed early primates to diversify safely, the very window researchers link to the delayed rise of large modern mammal groups never opened at all. Under any of these conditions, it becomes entirely plausible based on what we know about how contingent and narrow the actual human evolutionary pathway was, that no primate lineage ever reaches large brain size, that no hominin ever stands upright on an open plain, that no species anywhere on this alternate Earth ever develops language, agriculture, or writing. We have to be careful here and precise about where solid ground ends and speculation begins. It is entirely possible that some dinosaur lineage, under sustained pressure over 66 million years, could have developed greater intelligence, larger brain-to-body ratios, even sophisticated tool use. Several living birds, crows and parrots chief among them, already display problem-solving abilities that rival some primates, built on brain architecture entirely different from our own mammalian design. But claiming that any dinosaur lineage would inevitably develop something resembling human civilization is not a scientific inference. It is speculation stacked on speculation, and this film will not pretend otherwise. What the evidence does support is something quieter and, in its own way, more unsettling. Intelligence comparable to a crow's or a chimpanzee's is plausible. Technological civilization is not something evolution owes to any lineage, ours included. We are not the destination evolution was always traveling toward. We are one outcome among a near-infinite number of paths not taken that happened to survive a chain of events so specific, so contingent, that altering a single link, moving one falling rock by a matter of degrees, may have been enough to erase us from every possible future entirely. The sky did not go dark for the dinosaurs alone. Somewhere in the smoke and ash, a small, unremarkable nocturnal creature the size of a rat kept breathing, kept hiding, kept surviving one more night in a ruined world it had no way of understanding. That creature, or one very much like it, is very likely among our own distant ancestors. Its survival was not a triumph of destiny. It was luck, compounded across millions of years of further luck, each generation surviving just long enough to pass the chain forward one more link. Return for a moment to the birds outside your window, because they hold the final piece of this counterfactual, and it is not the piece the opening of this film led you to expect. We began by asking what dinosaurs might look like today if the asteroid had missed. But dinosaurs never actually disappeared at all. One lineage made it through the very worst-case scenario Earth has ever produced: the darkest skies, the coldest years, the most complete collapse of the food chain in the last several 100 million years, and on the other side of that catastrophe, it diversified into more than 10,000 living species, occupying nearly every corner of this planet, from Antarctic ice shelves to equatorial rainforest canopies to the ledge outside your apartment window. In the timeline we actually live in, the asteroid did not simply end the age of dinosaurs. It was, in a strange and almost unbearably precise way, the single event that opened the narrow evolutionary corridor our own species would eventually walk through. Tens of millions of years later, on two legs, under a sky that a falling rock had once, by the thinnest possible margin, cleared for us. So, when you picture that alternate Earth, resist the urge to fill it with monsters. Picture instead a world running on the same rules ours does, the same continents drifting, the same ice ages advancing and retreating, the same relentless, indifferent pressure to adapt or disappear, but with one different survivor standing at the top of nearly every large-bodied niche across 66 million years of upheaval. Somewhere on that Earth, herds of feathered grazers might cross open plains under a sun no human eye has ever watched rise. Somewhere, fast, cursorial predators might follow those herds across grass whose exact species we will never know. And somewhere, almost certainly, small mammals, our own distant relatives among them, would still be running, still hiding, still waiting for an opportunity that this time, in this version of history, might simply never come. The real asteroid did not just end a world 66 million years ago. By the thinnest possible margin of trajectory and timing, it opened the only path we can actually trace from that moment to this one, the one that runs through a small nocturnal survivor, through early primates in a newly available canopy, through hominins walking upright across an African savanna, and finally, through every uncertain, contingent step that led to a species capable of asking 66 million years later what might have happened if that rock had simply missed. If this kind of evidence-based journey through deep time is something you want more of, subscribing costs nothing and helps keep this kind of long-form, carefully researched storytelling going. Until the next investigation, keep looking up. Not every world that could have existed left a monster behind. Some of them, like this one, left us instead.